As a Japanese, I want to learn the history of the past so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. Never. So instead of criticizing each other's country, I want to talk about the future peace we should have. こんにちは。This is Tax Channel. Today I'm going to react to a video of why Japan's geography sucks. The island nation of Japan can be a good thing or bad thing because of its geographical features. Japan is an island nation and has never invaded by another country in its history, similar to the United Kingdom, which is also an island nation. On the other hand, because of the abundance of nature, there are many disasters that come from it. Earthquakes and tsunamis in particular are world famous for their devastating effects. So in this video, I as a Japanese would like to address the deeper issues. So let's get started.
This video was made possible by CuriosityStream. When you sign up at the link in the description, you'll also get access to Nebula, the streaming video platform that RealLifeLore is a part of. For over 100 years now, Japan has been one of the world's most powerful civilizations. Her impact on culture, technology, and society has been among the greatest in history. But all of this is despite her civilization's spawn point being not necessarily the greatest. The core of Japanese civilization has always been based around the Japanese archipelago in the Pacific Ocean. Japan has always been an island civilization, and modern-day Japan consists of 6,852 different islands. Although there's really only 4 important ones that you need to know about: Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. All of these islands combined give Japan a land area that's roughly equivalent to the US state of California, but it's a lot more spread out than that. If you place Japan off the east coast of the United States, the southernmost islands would be south of Miami, while the northernmost would be above Halifax. And unlike California, Japan has a population of nearly 127 million people, more than 3 times the population in California. However, most of this population is concentrated into just a few small areas on the island of Honshu, and a topographic map helps to explain why. This is Japan's first major geographic weakness. The home islands are absolutely covered with mountains. 73% of Japan's total land area, in fact, is mountainous, which means that most of Japan's land is incredibly difficult and expensive to develop for human habitation. With only 27% of her land not being covered by mountains,
73% of Japan is surrounded by mountains. Japan tends to worship nature. One of the reasons why there are so few Christians and Muslims in Japan is because historically, Japan has prized nature as a god. We pray to the god of nature because we have long known how scary nature can be. In the West, I think they believe that they can control nature, but not in Japan. In Japan, natural disasters have been happening since long ago, so we tend to see nature as a god. As a result, for example, while Western gardens are artificially designed, Japanese gardens are popular around the world because they are designed to make the most of nature. When I told this story to people in other countries, they are often surprised.
it means that despite being much larger in overall territory, Japan has about the same amount of livable and workable land that South Korea has. Most of the Japanese population is, therefore, crowded and stuffed into highly concentrated, dense urban areas across the scattered plains in between the mountains, like the Nobi Plain, home to 7 million, or the Osaka Plain, home to over 19 million. Japanese civilization historically was based around the Osaka Plain with the capital in Kyoto before it was moved to the larger, more strategic, and more productive Kanto Plain in the 17th century. The Kanto Plain is the largest single area of flat land in Japan with the highest potential for agriculture and cheap expansion, and it's why today the plain is home to the largest urban area in the world, Tokyo, home to 3 out of every 10 Japanese, 38 million people concentrated into an area the size of Kuwait. All 3 of these plains are home to massive urban areas because of their flat land and location nearby to bays that allow for easy trade and trade.
Japan's population is too concentrated in cities such as Tokyo and Osaka. As a result, the population of Japan's rural area is currently shrinking considerably. If left unchecked, the infrastructure of the country will break down. I want to solve this problem somehow because the charm of Japan lies in its rural areas, not in Tokyo and Osaka. I currently live in Tokyo, but I like the rural area better. So I'd like to show the charm of rural Japan to foreign people through this YouTube in the future.
Transportation. And Japan has always had to rely on trade to maintain her status as a great power, because the biggest weakness in Japan's geography is maintaining her enormous population on an island that doesn't have enough resources to sustain it. Only 12% of Japan's land is arable and suitable for farming, compared with 25% of the UK's land, 34% of Germany's land, or 53% of India's land. The Japanese islands are also famously poor in natural resources, with virtually no oil reserves, natural gas, coal, or minerals. Therefore, Japan has always had to look abroad for the resources to feed her population and fuel her economy, either through trade or through conquest. Japan currently relies extremely heavily on imported foodstuffs and fossil fuels, and for a time, the government tried to offset this dependence by switching to nuclear power. In 2010, 25% of Japan's electricity came from domestic nuclear energy production, but Japan's other great geographic weakness intervened: a severe vulnerability to natural disasters. The 2011 earthquake and tsunami triggered a nuclear meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear reactor plant, and the resulting outcry and public opinion against nuclear energy led to the closure of every single nuclear power plant in the entire country by 2012.
Japan is not self-sufficient and needs to rely on imports. Only 12% can be provided domestically. Use nuclear plants due to energy shortage. The tsunami generated by the Great East Japan earthquake caused a lot of damage in 2011. Especially scary because there have been many earthquakes recently as well. Have you ever experienced such a big earthquakes?
Today, only 4% of Japan's electricity comes from nuclear power, and the country is even more dependent on fossil fuel imports, and another disaster could strike again at any time. Japan is, after all, one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to natural disasters, and certainly the most vulnerable great power by a wide margin. The top two most expensive disasters in human history both took place in Japan. The previously mentioned 2011 earthquake and tsunami that caused $411 billion in damages, and the 1995 Great Hanshin earthquake that caused $330 billion in damages. Japan's geographic location is, unfortunately, at the intersection of 4 different tectonic plates that are grinding and scraping past one another, which often causes huge earthquakes and devastating tsunamis. But those aren't the only disasters that Japan has to worry about. The intersection of these plates has also given the Japanese islands 108 current active volcanoes, 10% of all the active volcanoes in the world, which occasionally erupt to cause even more damage. The various natural disasters and rugged geography have made development in Japan historically difficult, but they also make any outside invasion of Japan a very difficult thing to accomplish. Throughout her entire history, Japan has never once been conquered by an outside power. And part of the reason for this is just because historically, Japan has been located pretty far away from all the other major world powers. China is located 800 kilometers away across an open ocean, and the only major time an invasion came from this direction was when the Mongols attempted to invade twice in the 13th century and failed twice from 2 different typhoons that destroyed their fleets. Natural disasters can occasionally work in Japan's favor after all, and since Japan is located
Japan is a country that has never been invaded. In history, many royal families around the world have ended tragically. They were exiled or executed by the people or foreign enemies. While the world domestic changed frequently, only Japan's imperial family has maintained a lineage of 10,000 generations. This is because Japan has never been invaded by any other country. Today, the emperor is not only remaining emperor in the world. His existence is a miracle of our world history.
so far away from the troubles of Asia and the rest of the world, they have the option at any time to pursue a policy of isolationism, which they did for over 2 centuries between 1641 and 1853, when Japan had essentially zero contact with the outside world and punished any Japanese person leaving the islands with death if they ever returned. But the lack of raw materials and farmland at home needed to supply her economy and feed her people has occasionally led Japan to pursue a very different policy of imperialism to conquer what she needs.
Japan's isolation and modernization. Japan modernized at once even though it had been closed off from the rest of the world for 200 years since the Edo period. It's true that Japan was able to grow as a country without missing out on modernization here. But at the same time, we lost a lot of Japanese culture, which is a shame. Also, the military industry developed here, which eventually led to a disastrous war, World War II.
Korea has always been the first target. The peninsula is a logical choice for expansion because it's close to Japan's core, it can serve as a funnel for the Japanese military to push deeper into Asia from, and it's rich with natural mineral resources and arable land. A unified Japan attempted to conquer Korea once for these reasons before the isolationist period in 1592, and then again in 20th century after the end of the isolationist period. Japan's rapidly industrializing economy in the 20th century demanded things like oil, coal, steel, and of course, food, all of which Japan's geography has relatively poor amounts of. And so, Japan set about on decades of conquest and war to secure those resources. She conquered Taiwan from China, defeated Russia and conquered Korea, attacked Germany and conquered her Pacific islands, attacked China again to conquer Manchuria, and then eventually invaded all of China. It was a dangerous addiction that Japan struggled to satisfy, because every attack that Japan made resulted in even more international sanctions that restricted her ability to trade for resources and continue her war. When the US embargoed Japan in 1940 and cut off her oil supply, the Japanese military calculated that they only had 2 years left of oil in their reserves before they ran dry and couldn't continue. The need for oil placed on them by their geography and trade restrictions caused the Japanese military to commit to invading Indonesia and the Philippines, which would eventually bring in basically the entire world against them. Japan overextended themselves all across the Pacific, and with rapidly depleting reserves of oil and coal that they couldn't possibly replenish back at home, they inevitably lost against a massive coalition that they couldn't have ever hoped to defeat. But the allies of the war faced the same problem that the Mongols faced in the 13th century.
Japan invaded Korea and Chinese because of the lack of domestic resources. Historically, people tend to dislike Japan because of its aggression against China and Korea. But our younger generation has not done such disastrous things. As a Japanese, I want to learn the history of the past so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. Never. So instead of criticizing each other's country, I want to talk about the future peace we should have.
Invading Japan itself really sucks. Japan planned a massive, all-out defense of their home islands that probably would have cost the Allies millions of casualties. So rather than dealing with that, the US resorted to dropping the atomic bombs, and Japan surrendered without it ever coming to that. In the aftermath, Japan lost all of her imperial conquests since her Industrial Revolution, and was once again confined to the meager resources and farmland of the Japanese home islands. Japan continues to claim the southern Kuril Islands, however, which were annexed by the Soviet Union and later Russia after the war. And because of that dispute, Russia and Japan have still, to this day in 2019, never signed an official peace treaty ending the Second World War between them.
Northern Territory's issue with Russia. This will never be solved as long as the US and Japan are on good terms, because Japan has military treaty with the US. If Russia returns the territory to Japan, it will have a base for the US military. This is why Russia will never return its territory to Japan. Never been. When the days come when Russia and the US become friends, we can solve this problem.
The Japan of today, however, manages its geography struggle by trading for its resources rather than conquering them. Japan has since specialized in automobiles, electronics, industrial equipment, and robotics, and trades these specialized goods for the raw materials and foodstuff that she desperately needs. 84% of Japan's energy and 50% of her meat is imported from other countries, and she is the world's largest importer of natural gas, second largest coal importer, second largest agricultural importer, and third largest oil importer. It's safe to say that Japan still struggles with her geographic limitations and still deals with them by seeking out resources abroad, just in a different manner than she has in the past. Of course, the way that Japan attempted to solve her geographic limitations in the past through conquest was not justifiable.
Japan relies heavily on imports even today. And Japan's industry is to make and export cars based on imported raw materials. We can't survive without imports, especially from China. Even now, Japan can't even make masks in their own country because all masks are all gone at once. From now on, we need to develop the ability to provide for our own needs instead of relying on China and other foreign countries for cheap labor and resources. That's all the commentary I could master from a Japanese perspective. The island nation of Japan is a unique environment, and I hope you'll come visit us in the future. If there's anything unique about your country, please leave a comment. Lastly, please don't forget to subscribe my channel and like me. いつもありがとうございます。バイバイ。